So, if you have at all been keeping up with my VOD channel, then you know that I've been playing Final Fantasy 16. And I know exactly why Square Enix is reporting low sales between Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Remake and Rebirth. These have a lot to do with one another, as I will explain, but I want to start with Final Fantasy 7 Remake. First things first, a lot of people are saying that no game is going to sell as well as its prequel did during the pandemic, and that is very, very true. But it's a little bit more nuanced than just that. That's not the entire reason. It could be a pretty big part of it, but I still say that there's a lot more to it than just that. Starting with Final Fantasy VII Remake, their big mistake was they told everyone that Final Fantasy VII Remake would be a game that you could play and appreciate even if you haven't played the original. To an extent, that's kind of sort of true, but not entirely. Final Fantasy VII Remake is too different to be a faithful recreation of the original that everybody loves. So, it's not doing a good enough job to play purely off of the nostalgia, but at the same time, it's not different enough to be its own rendition of the classic story that, new people can enjoy and digest. So it's not for longtime fans, and it's not different enough to pull in new people, which is where a lot of the confusion comes in. Another big part of the way Final Fantasy VII Remake performed has to do with the timed exclusivity. That 100% hurt them. But I'll get into that more a little bit later. Here comes Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is the second part of the remake trilogy that they're doing. Final Fantasy VII Remake got people's attention. They're like, I'm not really sure how... A lot of people aren't really sure how they felt about it, myself included. But I'm like, I'm willing to give them a chance and let them cook. The problem is that Rebirth comes out, again, console exclusive, limited time, and this is their chance to prove that this game is a real remake or a different rendition of the original game, and they drop the ball on that. I won't post any spoilers or I won't talk about any spoilers, but if you were thinking that things were going to be different, like I was thinking, then you're going to be incredibly disappointed. You just are. That being said, that goes back to the fact that it's not similar enough to be a faithful recreation. So this trilogy isn't pleasing anybody. And because Final Fantasy Rebirth was a timed exclusive on console, PS5 players were basically beta testers. And no matter what they did, spoilers were going to get out. And they have. So if you were to ask me, am I going to get Final Fantasy VII Rebirth when it comes to PC? Hell no, I'm not. Absolutely not. Because I already know that I'm not going to get what I wanted. Whereas if they had released Rebirth at the same time on PC as they did on console, then I would have got it, been disappointed, but at least they would have gotten their sale. The third game would suffer, but it was going to do that either way, because it's especially going to do that now. Basically, anyone who didn't play the first game isn't going to play the second game. A lot of people who played the second game, from what I'm hearing, aren't really interested in the third game. So, this middle piece could have been at least a success for them. The third game was never going to be that, but now that people know for sure, I don't think that third game is going to sell well at all. So, they're reporting low sales on Final Fantasy 16 and Rebirth. I think whatever they call the third game is going to have even lower sales. Then enters Final Fantasy 16. And again, we have ourselves a timed exclusive. What are people saying about Final Fantasy 16? Before I even got my hands on this game, I was hearing that it was very easy, that there was basically no replayability, and and that it was essentially Final Fantasy. It was a Devil May Cry game with a Final Fantasy skin. Now, who wanted that? Who asked? Who asked for that? Who genuinely wanted them to take Devil May Cry and stretch the Final Fantasy identity over it? A lot of people don't like turn-based RPGs. I get it. You need to work on your attention span, but I understand. But to take a very clear action game and try and disguise it as a RPG, bad move. Bad move. And now that I have my hands on the game, I know for a fact that it's a bad move, because the levels, the stats, all of the numbers feel absolutely freaking pointless. Why are you patronizing me with this? But I'm getting ahead of myself again. I have the PC version of Final Fantasy 16. Square Enix is notorious for having terrible PC ports, and this game is the embodiment of that. I've had to install 4 performance mods just to get the game to stay stable. Those mods include a registry edit for CPU, as well as 60 FPS pre-rendered cutscenes, and an ultra-wide / narrower support and more Final Fantasy 16 fix. Why in the hell do I have to install mods to make this run? Well, I've got this PC this year, so there's no excuse. People often refer to Naoki Yoshida as the savior of the Final Fantasy series, but obviously not. The performance of this game is abysmal. So, I'm already sort of on the fence about its gameplay and combat, and then you go and you throw this horrible, horrible PC port at me and expect me to recommend this to someone? Get out of here with that. Devil May Cry 3, 4, and 5 are right over there. Why am I going to send somebody who wants a Final Fantasy game to play an inferior version of Devil May Cry? Now let me get into the gameplay, because again, people are going to try and hand wave off performance issues as get a stronger PC, or mine runs fine, play it on console, stuff like that. Fine. We'll take the performance and the bugs out of the equation, and we'll just talk about the game itself. So, what are we dealing with when it comes to Devil May Cry Final Fantasy? Well, for one, I wasn't expecting the story to go so serious. It's a very dark narrative, something sort of comparable to Final Fantasy Type 0. And it caught me off guard, genuinely. I wasn't expecting it. This might be the most brutal Final Fantasy game since Type 0, and I'm okay with that. But they did mess it up. The story is kind of reminiscent of something like Game of Thrones. There's a lot of intrigue and subterfuge between various characters. But the mistake that they're making here is in their pre-rendered cutscenes and the combat. Specifically with the icons, the summons, the guardian forces, you know, those. The problem is that the way that they interact with each other when they're fighting is incredibly brutal. Very, not quite WWE wrestling. I wouldn't even say it's like John Wick. When I say that the combat is brutal, I mean that there's a lot of the animations and the choreography and the way that they're flipping each other and biting and clawing and cutting each other's talons off or arms off is very visceral. Yeah, that's the word, visceral. But it's so over the top that it doesn't have any type of weight to it. Icons are constantly regenerating. They're recovering from hits that look like they're pretty severe, and it makes it pretty hard to get a good gauge as to like what how damaged they are or how hurt something is, I mean, just take the opening cinematic, right? The opening cinematic starts with a fight between Phoenix and Ifrit. It's not entirely complete, but the full scope of their battle sort of caps the end of the tutorial. And in that altercation between the two, Ifrit and Phoenix are absolutely tearing each other limb from limb. I mean, they're hitting each other, dragging each other across rocks, slamming into like the ruins of whatever this place is. They're really, really going at it. But it doesn't really feel like any of those hits actually do any sort of damage to either of them. And it made it pretty much impossible to tell who was winning right up until the final moments. I won't spoil that here, but like, the fight didn't mean anything at all until the last hit. And that sort of just sucked all of the climactic and bombastic flow out of the entire thing. Later altercations would go on to have the same issues, where somebody gets a limb cut off, and less than a couple of seconds, less than a full minute later, that limb is completely regenerated, and they're back to swinging it around like it had never happened in the first place. I'm thinking that they wanted it to be cinematic. They wanted it to be a oh shit moment. But in my head, I'm thinking of like the Benny Hill circus music playing in the background of this fight, because nothing has any meaning, any weight, any effect. The urgency of the fight that they spent a lot of time setting up visually and narratively just falls completely flat. And then speaking of music, I have another complaint. Now, I'm by no means saying that the music in this game is bad, but I had to ask Dez, who was also playing this game at the same time, what he thought about the music being very, very samey. I went back to confirm it, and they offered different songs, but several hours into me playing it, I kind of kept thinking, why does this sound like the same song that played during like the training section near the start of the game? That's really, really bad. Keep in mind, this is the same composer that does all of the music for Final Fantasy XIV, and that problem doesn't exist in that game. Garuda's theme is very clearly different from Ifrit's theme. Bahamut's theme, Odin's theme, they all have completely different tones and feelings, and you can easily tell them apart. But in this game, I was almost tempted to just mute the music and put my own on in the background because of how repetitive the melodies sound. Again, the music is by no means bad, but when it feels like you've been listening to the exact same song in various towns and areas, like, okay, obviously, you know, you might have an overall theme for the plains area, right? But when you move on to the swamp, you expect it to change up a little bit. And then when you go to the fire area, you know, something different. And then when you get to the main kingdom, or when you start to fight the Empire, again, you want to switch. That doesn't feel like it's happening. So, all in all, the musical presentation of this mainline Final Fantasy game is very, very mid. That's not something I think I've ever said about any of the Final Fantasy games, regardless of whether or not I liked them. I can't stand Final Fantasy 15, but it's got a lot of good music that's different from itself. It's got a varied soundtrack. Final Fantasy XIV I brought up also has a very varied soundtrack. Even Dirge of Cerberus, which is... I mean, yikes, it's Dirge of Cerberus, has some music that I can remember very clearly. But if you asked me to name a song from Final Fantasy XVI, I don't think I can. And this is after... what am I at? 12 hours? 12 hours of gameplay, and I couldn't tell you a single Final Fantasy song. And then we come to the difficulty. Again, I'm 12 hours into playing this, and I didn't know that you could unlock more skills until very, very recently. In fact, again, that was Des who had to say, hey, you have quite a bit of ability points you can go spend. And I was like, what? The combat was already so easy with the abilities that I had. The idea of unlocking more, I mean, is a double-edged sword, because obviously variety is the spice of life, but the combat was already so easy that unlocking more, I don't think that's just gonna make the problem so much worse. I was talking to him about this, and we were trying to see if there was like optional super bosses, or you know, like a super death mode and something like that, and there isn't. There are challenges that you can do at the main hub, but those challenges don't have any type of reward. There's a practice mode, but what do you need to practice? The combat is so simple, so bare bones. It's almost repetitious. I don't see any world where a competent gamer is going to need to go into a training mode. You're not going to fight anything that's going to last various combos, because again, this isn't Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry, you definitely need something like a training mode. Absolutely. Because the amount of variety in the enemies and your skills go hand in hand with the fact that enemies will absolutely mess you up in a Devil May Cry game. But that's countered by the fact that you have all of the tools that you need to deal with them. You just need to learn how to use them. But if you're playing on a difficulty that's too easy, all of the enemies will die before you get a chance to do those super cool combos. Final Fantasy XVI didn't learn that. So, yeah, I absolutely know why Square Enix is reporting low sales. And unfortunately, because of their strategies in the past, they're going to directly impact the future. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. How do you feel about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? Without spoiling it. Not that I'm gonna play it or anything. What do you think about Final Fantasy XVI or games that are too easy? I think Final Fantasy XVI is going to be a relatively long game, but now that I know that the combat isn't going to make me work very hard, I don't really know if that's a good thing. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video.